The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Good evening and welcome to my State of Mind. I am Dan Yorke. What plays out in this presidential election and COVID-19 is going to be something, but a lot of it's going to have to do with legislation from Washington, whether there'll be another stimulus, where the rubber meets the road in terms of the Senate and the House of Representatives coming together. Clearly, there's a lot of wait and see here in Rhode Island for what Washington is going to do. Rich Arenberg is an expert in the U.S. Senate. He is a Brown University professor with a long list of roles and responsibilities there, but his 30-plus years in the U.S. Senate have advised him on that body and made him one of the nation's leading experts. He's my guest this evening. Here's a little bit of background from recent reports on what's going on in Washington, re all of this in the presidential election, and then we'll bring Rich on.
Of the last half.
President Trump will hold a campaign rally in North Carolina this evening, where the local Republican leader is asking the president to comply with state orders and wear a face mask.
He'll be tested this morning. I was already tested this morning, and when we talk about actually wearing a mask, it's really for the protection of others. So I don't see a need for the president to do that.
The coronavirus pandemic continues to dominate presidential politics, with a back and forth about a future vaccine over Labor Day.
I want full transparency on the vaccine.
With me, it's the faster the better.
President Trump continues to tie the timeline for a vaccine to November 3rd, Election Day.
We're going to have a vaccine very soon, maybe even before a very special date. You know what date I'm talking about?
Democratic nominee Joe Biden says linking the vaccine to the election could hurt its chances for success.
He said so many things that aren't true. I'm worried if we do have a really good vaccine, people are going to be reluctant to take it. So he's undermining public confidence.
President Trump says it's Biden and his running mate Kamala Harris who are undermining public confidence about the vaccine.
Contrary to all of the lies, the vaccine, that they're politicalized. They'll say anything. And it's so dangerous for our country what they say. But the vaccine will be very safe and very effective.
Biden says he prays for a vaccine soon.
If I could get a vaccine tomorrow, I'd do it. If it would cost me the election, I'd do it. We need a vaccine. We need it now. 9 pharmaceutical manufacturers working on a vaccine issued a joint statement saying they will only submit a vaccine for approval if it's proven safe and effective.
And so, with no further ado, I'm really pleased to have a friend of the show, Rich Arenberg, is back. He is, I don't always have to do this, but I'm checking all of my notes because of his many titles and successes at this point. He is the visiting professor of political science at Brown, of course, a senior fellow in international and public affairs at the Watson Institute, which is such a principal organization for learning politics and dialogue here in this state. And now, because he's got nothing better to do, he's the director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy, also out of Brown. Rich, how many rounds of golf are you playing in the middle of this whole thing?
No, I'm pretty much locked up in the house. I go back and forth to the post office.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the work that you're still doing, the thinking and the writing that you're still doing, and the limits to the personal experience that we all have. It's some time, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. These are uncommon times. Unprecedented in our lifetime, certainly.
Yeah, without a doubt. However, what I'm going to ask you to do tonight is to mingle some themes that you've been working on in terms of government operations and the like, and what we're experiencing here now with COVID. So, folks, so you understand, Rich Arenberg is long an expert on the United States Senate, having served in the Senate for many, many years. In fact, just because it's been a few months since Rich has been on, Rich, remind everybody what your personal experience is at the U.S. Senate.
Well, I spent 34 years on Capitol Hill, worked for 3 United States senators, starting with Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts, and then Majority Leader George Mitchell from Maine, and then Carl Levin, who was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee.
Yeah, so, I mean, that practical experience is, well, it's priceless, no doubt. And you've been able to teach government and operations of the Senate for a long time. And long you have been writing about how the Senate operates. And while, the American public kind of sees this stuff as drivel, it seems to me, and I say that with respect to you because it drives me crazy, this drivel right now and how government operates, both federally and even on the state side, and I'll get your take on the state side in a little later, I don't think it's ever more important. The process of how government works to provide the solutions that we're all craving, say in COVID and with race relations and, national security and the whole trauma of the impeachment process we went through. People need to understand how their government works, right? Make a little speech on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. It can be boring sometimes to focus on the nuts and bolts of how the process works, but it's fundamental. It's where the emphasis of the U.S. Constitution impacts our personal lives, and we've been in a period now in this administration where it's no secret, but that President Trump has really challenged many of the, not just the mores, but in fact some of the laws and some of the rules and processes of our government. It's sort of a jump ball.
Yeah, no doubt. So why don't we do this? Laying that concern as a foundation, when we come back, Rich has written a recent piece on how government is going to respond to COVID and the politics of that, and how the Senate actually is going to play a significant role in all of this. When we come back to continue conversation with Rich Arenberg, expert on the Senate and man of all teachings and directing at Brown University. Right back on My State of Mind. Stay with us. Welcome back to My State of Mind. On the screen, you see Richard Arenberg. He is professor of political science at Brown University. He's the interim director of the Taubman Institute with the Watson Institute as well at Brown University. These are, by the way, the think tanks that not only help to drive regional conversation, but national conversation and policy direction in the country. Rich, your recent piece on the Senate, where your expertise lies, and the COVID response is fascinating. Tell me what you think is the dynamic right here, and how the election politics are forcing the agenda.
Right. Well, as you know, as your audience will be familiar with, the Congress has been in a kind of stalemate over the additional legislation to deal with the coronavirus crisis, particularly for unemployed folks and for state and local governments and for small business owners. And of course, all of the recent focus on the post office. And all of this is coming to a head really as we approach the election. And although the Republican majority, particularly in the Senate, has pretty much dragged their feet about doing another major relief bill. Basically what I've said is I think the pressures of the approach of the election on November 3rd really will force the hand of the Republicans, because particularly vulnerable are a number of the incumbents who need to run for re-election in the Senate. And so control of the Senate is at stake.
Yeah, so it's really been, I don't know, the understory in this political season. We're so focused on Donald Trump and how he's even in what might be his electable deathly mistakes, how he drives that agenda and how Joe Biden reacts to it, and we're so presidentially oriented anyway.
And the classic, I mean, what has been classic Donald Trump is his ability to change the subject at any time.
Well, not necessarily to his favor, I don't think.
Oh, yeah, but
the last last week, again, folks, you're seeing this show on Wednesday. We're taping it actually on Thursday of last week due to some production schedules. So there might be a lot of things that are happening in the interim that Rich and I are not referring to. In fact, I promise you there will be. Raising the specter of whether or not he had mini strokes and blah, 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 and da-da-da. And I'm not so sure that he's throwing everything against the wall these days as fast as it comes into his head, which has always been his style. But going back to how it affects the Senate has always been, and you teach this, I'll use this word, you tell me if it's accurate, a plotting group,
by design,
a slow-moving group. So it has to condition itself to rid itself of the day-to-day challenges that the president's rhetoric bring. At the same time, they've got to cumulatively account for how it's starting to hurt them, certainly on the Republican side, correct?
Right. And remember that the House of Representatives, which of course is led by Democrats and Speaker Pelosi, they passed a massive bill in May called the Heroes Bill.
Right.
And it's been sitting on the table in the Senate all of this time as of course, unemployment, the additional $600 on unemployment, for example, has expired.
So you think that, let's just talk about this COVID response. You think, look, we are in desperate shape in Rhode Island with schools. Now, Massachusetts is in maybe a little bit better position when it comes to its facilities. But as we've been speaking, the governor is trying to force the issue on the schools, but not providing the money. She's holding COVID money because she's afraid there won't be any more COVID money. We could get into the weeds on that, but I don't want to. But my point is that what happens out of Washington has so much of an impact on this kind of stuff. So you're telling me
there's even a more direct impact, more direct link between what's going on in Washington on Capitol Hill and people's daily lives.
Sure.
But right now, everyone that has children is stressing over, are they frightened? Are they scared? Are they anxious to send their kids back to school? Everybody's facing that dilemma.
So you're convinced, if I hear you correctly, that the Senate will take up action because the political winds are so dramatic for the individual senators.
Right.
They're going to have to do that because, and you think that the House of Representatives, the Democrats, will have the upper hand in crafting what the Senate approves based on the pollable difference between Biden and Trump right now. True?
I think that's right. Yes, I think that's right. I think that the leverage right now is on the side of the Democrats because there's such a crying need for action to be taken. The Republican majority in the Senate just can't afford to just ignore that. Mitch McConnell, who's shown, he's been very effective as an obstructionist over these many years, going back to the Obama administration now. But in this circumstance, as majority leader, if he wants to keep that job, he's got to re-elect a majority in the Senate, and they're in real trouble.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about the politics of the presidential race and whether or not the Senate is ready to kind of let the president do his own thing. Right back with Rich Arenberg from Brown University here on My State of Mind. Please stay with us. Back to my state of mind, Rich Arenberg, a professor of political science at Brown University with the Taubman Institute, the Watson Institute, and beyond, and an expert really on the Senate. Rich, you talk about the Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, being an obstructionist. Immediately, viewers say, okay, another Democratic hack, blah, blah, blah. But even he would admit that through the Obama administration, I mean, he made an express point to say that he was there to stop their agenda. And right now he's trying to ride the roller coaster of his own president's agenda. So when you call him an obstruction,
the thing that makes the Senate move,
it's really not partisan to say that.
Right. I think that's exactly right. And the thing that makes the Senate move in the final analysis is public opinion. I mean, we have a democratic system, and it's not just kind of Pollyanna social, studies talk to say that what the public wants, what the public opinion demands, can oftentimes require the Congress to move. And I think we're in that sort of circumstance now. They just cannot ignore people's real life experience. Every constituent in the country is feeling the impact of this pandemic.
And that 10 to 15% voter out there that, may hold their nose over Donald Trump, but don't want to give the House away to the leftists that are putting pressure on Biden, and all of that kind of worry the constituents have. Somewhat is overcome by the idea that the virus response has just not been what people would hope. Now, of course, we're already hearing November vaccine operations, which, by the way,
Sure.
People can't match that election season up to a vaccine delivery. Well, then you can pull anybody's leg. Then. I mean, come on, man. Really, it's just we all want it, but it's got to be effective. And if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? In terms of
exactly. And we now have 4 years of experience with Donald Trump and how he operates. So we know, I can say with great certainty that when we get close to November 3rd, he will declare victory in some way regarding a vaccine. I mean, what he wants to do is pressure his own administration to actually get one out there to point to and say, even if it's not very widely distributed, to say, here it is, and you can thank me for this victory. I pushed it through. But even if there's not yet any vaccine, he will attempt to make it look so close that it'll be there before the first of the year or something like that. He will attempt to run on delivering a vaccine, whether that has happened or not.
So let me ask you as a final thought here. So with the Senate races, by the way, we could do another show, and probably should, on what happened in Massachusetts last week with Ed Markey surviving as a progressive against the Kennedy legacy, where a lot of old blue chip Democrats were still holding on to.
Remarkable, really remarkable.
It is remarkable, but. Tell me about, I only have a minute, the Republican senatorial candidates out there across the country. You didn't see a lot of them on the virtual convention. I mean, the convention was Trump-centric.
Sure.
Are they running their own races, separating themselves from the president? And will that impact the crucial states in this electoral college count?
One thing that's been characteristic about this president is that he has such a stranglehold on his base, which is a big chunk of the Republican base, so that this has frozen Republican senators and House members for that matter, but we're talking about the Senate. It has frozen them in place. They're afraid to cross Trump. And so although they're not anxious as they're running for their own reelection. They're not anxious, to have a bear hug from it had even with nothing to do with the virus. They want the 6 feet of separation for other reasons, but they can't run away from him, and so therefore the presidential race at the top of the ticket is going to have an enormous impact all the way down the ticket, all the way down to state races, which are critically important. Remember, this is a year that ends in 0. So control of state legislatures is critically important because of the redrawing of congressional districts that will affect the shape of the House of Representatives for the next 10 years.
I just wish that people, and I know this audience might be different, thankfully, but I just hope people pay attention to their government, because as you just so eloquently explained, the knee bone is connected to the shin bone, which is connected to the ankle bone here. This whole thing is one big Democratic leg, and we've got to understand that. Rich, we will check back with you more often over the course of this electoral season, and we thank you so much for your thoughts on this.
It's always a pleasure.
Arenberg from Brown University, folks. Final word when we come back on My State of Mind. Please stay tuned. We will continue to follow the plight of small business in this state, because without the stimulus and the economy and their survival, we got big problems. You have a great night. Talk to you on the radio at 3 on WPRO. Good night.